Okay, so in terms of topics, and I think there's a few discussions on this, so maybe, I think Dan brought up a good topic that I think we should go into, although it may involve more of a conversation with Nikolai. I'll touch really quickly on the some of the timestamp stuff. I'm going to put together a pull request just to describe the floor instance, ceiling instance behavior. I think we had landed on a fairly reasonable consent, or we got close enough in the discussion on that we can at least get a pull request that's reviewable. I meant to get it in before this meeting, but I had other responsibilities this week. So, I think that's the next steps there. I'll try to break it down into a couple of small pull requests, one for the floor and ceiling instance behavior, so we can kind of nail that down, and another one for any sort of tagging or database type annotations. So those are somewhat independent conversations, and I think that we can do that separately. So that's just a quick update from my end, and I'll ping the when I get those together, I'll ping them to the Zulip, and we can discuss there or in this meeting next week. So just wanted to do a quick status update there. But other than that, I didn't have specific additional topics today. I think that Dan floated a couple things that we could talk about.
Maybe I'll give an opportunity first if anybody has anything kind of urgent that they've kind of come across either in implementation or thinking about the spec, wants to add that to the queue for today.
Brian and I were talking about implementing kind of in the view definition layer, having a value set keyword instead of a bunch of different codes for trying to basically query different areas of FHIR. And instead of trying to union all the different observations based on the code, you can just put a value set keyword into the from clause, and then you're thinking of simplifying it a lot. It would remove a lot of redundant semantics, basically. So that's all I had to say.
Ryan, I know you implemented has concept, I think.
Yeah, so actually, well, it was member of, but
oh, sorry, member of, wrong one.
But it's just, but nonetheless, I think this is a great topic to discuss, whether we use member of or some other mechanism, because basically, almost any sort of or a lot of meaningful FHIR queries are going to need value sets, and so first class support for FHIR path in the view definitions, I absolutely would hope that we can support. And so yeah, Jason, if you had some ideas around that, the approach that we had taken in our little internal experiments, which is actually open source, is to actually implement the FHIR path member of function, in which you could pass in a value set, identifier, basically the URI to reference the value set. And so you could do, examples that we had would be, I guess, medications member of LDL medications, and create a table of all your LDL meds, for instance. And similarly for observations or condition types or conditions member of the diabetes value set. And that works fairly nicely with the FHIR path member of, but so I strongly agree with the support. We should certainly talk about what the best way to do it is.
Yeah, I didn't know the member of was implemented, so that's my fault, but I agree.
It's a big spec, trust me. I miss things there all the time, and it doesn't necessarily mean that's necessarily the best way to represent it in the views either. So but yeah, there is a FHIR path member of function in which you can pass in a string that identifies a value set. I do think that there's actually perhaps a related conversation though, because FHIR path, we can support the member of function, but in our SQL translation, the actual implementation of that still needs something behind it. And actually, I think this probably leads to a related conversation of because the member of does a set check for whether the value is in the value set. The way that we had done it in our little proof of concept was to basically create a value set table, which basically has a flat tabular representation of value set expansions. So basically it's there's the value set ID and the code system, the code value, and the member of implementation just basically did evolved into a where expression where code value in the value set table, of course checking for code system as well. But yeah, actually this does bring up, I think this does bring up a point. It's we should have, I think it'd be really valuable to have a standard flattened representation of value set expansions to support this. And perhaps, we could even consider a flat representation of things is there relationships, if you're using a lot of queries, you want to navigate the SNOMED hierarchy or something like that. So whether we want to use ISA or something like that too. So this is a much deeper topic than saying, yeah, let's use member of for sure.
Yeah,
think we could maybe make it simple though with just, at least there's some use cases we have right away where it's just like, is this condition code in this set of codes? Or is this lab or component code in this set of codes? So I don't know if we want to dive into the ontology space. Like, I think that could be done in different phases or just different capabilities depending.
I agree. So maybe we just focus on like simple value set membership checks now, and that can get us. I agree, that gets us a long ways.
Yeah, I could also at a subsequent meeting kind of present. So I've been pulling in the OMOP structures that they're using for kind of doing the terminology, and they have a pretty simple. I think it's like 4 or 5 tables that have kind of been used for many years in research to do kind of the terminology translation and the kind of subsummation where you is a relationship and contains relationships and parent relationships. I'm not saying that I think I'm not convinced that their way is necessarily best, but it is a way that's publicly documented for doing this. That's non-proprietary. So we could certainly at least look at that. The other nice thing is that they kind of publish their tables so that you can kind of just pull them into a database instead of having to kind of load values and create your own tables. So anyway, I think it's probably worth down the road potentially looking at that, but I like the idea of starting with just kind of value set expansions that Brian mentioned, and I think similar to what you've been doing, Ryan, with member up.
Yeah, so yeah, it's maybe good topics to kind of, we could do like maybe a plan like a more of a show and tell next week. I mean, I could do like a quick demo of the approach that we've taken with member of, so a quick example so far. I'll just show like the example. So this is so the predecessor towards this, well, not really a predecessor, but this is like some experiments that we had done that kind of follow these patterns. And so this is actually just a Python notebook. It actually works and you can run it. And it uses like this FHIR path builder that we had put together that translates to SQL. And let's see here. And so essentially what we'll do is I mean, the approach that we've taken is we'll basically, we have this little snippet of code where we'll grab what value sets we need and just save them as a flat table. So in this case, if I have a value set of statin medications, actually I'm not sure. This is probably condition codes. And so basically I just have this flat table. This is arbitrary schemas, arbitrary column names, but kind of illustrates the idea where you have the URI for the value set, version information, and the system and code. So this is where we get the reference data from. So it's about as simple as it can get there. And then when actually running the measure itself, so this is just a constant in the code there, but so this obviously looks very different than our current spec proposal, and I think hopefully this illustrates the pattern a bit, where we have this Python builder where for observation we select, we get these columns and we'll say, where the member of like is an LDL test. And so this is, literally the FHIR path member of function. And the LDL test, this is being Python code, I just used a literal Python variable, but this would probably be a great opportunity for like the constant section in our spec proposal. So if we have a member of, we have the LDL value set constant, and we can just pass it in there. So this is kind of, turned out to be like a nice syntax where going from this, we can immediately get this pretty clean table of just LDL values and what supporting information, what the supporting information that they need from that. So I think member of does the trick fairly well. In terms of the SQL translation, it basically just does the where exists and then does the select against that reference table. Query optimizers are pretty good at narrowing that down, but of course, the implementation of member of is going to be very wildly depending on your tech stack. But we can attest that it works pretty well for at least this columnar representation that we're using, and I'm sure it'll work well for other models as well. Anyway, just wanted to share this purely for illustrative purposes of kind of what we have started today. But yeah, we should consider this and other options as we kind of get something like this built into the spec, which I definitely agree it will be an important piece.
What is LDL test again? Is that a data structure or is that?
Yeah, it's just a string constant actually. So yeah, since this is so it's basically a constant for this.
Oh, right. So we might want to consider the way FHIR does with the pipe version, because But yeah, I get that. That makes sense.
Yeah, pipe version makes sense. Yeah, definitely keep it constant. That's a good idea. But yeah, I mean, so that's just if it's like, yeah, nice thing is member of there, and
Yeah,
then
this is what I was hoping it was going to look like. This is nice.
Oh, well, good. glad it makes sense at least. It seems to generalize fairly well. I mean, in the same logic, like we have other examples where just using those string constants. So we'll have things like actually, well, here's one where we find coordinate CHD or equivalent risks. So we're from conditions, we're selecting our fields, and then conditions code member of CHD or equivalent risk, and there that is. So. Yeah, and if folks are curious, the notebook, anyone can actually run it. You just basically need a free tier. I mean, it's on GCP since I work at Google, but it's actually portable between systems as well. So I will ping it to the chat here if anyone is curious about that example there.
Do we have a schema that represents the value set row?
Yeah, I do think we do want a schema that would be standardized there. So the schema that so basically this is this is the schema that we used in this example, but this is like literally the smallest possible schema that could work to satisfy this example, and not intended to be like a recommendation, but just kind of illustrated. So we have the same URI, so that's all there is to it. Also, we just kind of put together a quick little terminology service client. So we can, in these examples, you can pull the terminologies and basically just materialize that value set to our value set table, which was convenient because that way if somebody's doing an ad hoc analysis and in their own environment and wants to grab a value set, they can quickly save it there. So
I guess I was thinking like a view definition that we standardized for FHIR value set that's expanded so that you could take a off-the-shelf FHIR value set and turn it into whatever we would expect.
Yeah, I think that'd be very doable. I mean, and probably a good test of our view definitions. And I feel like, this table would be, could definitely be created from an expanded value set, but I actually quite like the idea of creating a view definition to express something like this.
We think about this a little bit and then kind of revisit it next week and see people's ideas on it.
I think that sounds good. We can tinker with PASA, the view definition as well. I think this looks nice. But yeah, the OMOP stuff, I also would be very interested in seeing.
So I'm far from an expert on OMOP, but I've used the terminology tables by just pulling them into FHIR, the databases where I was analyzing FHIR data. And so I can certainly at least walk through what the fields are and kind of how they fit together.
Sounds good.
I have to look at that again. It's been at least a year. So
yeah, that sounds great. I'd love to see that, and we can consider variations of this option. I'd love to a view that creates a table, and like I said, take all this with a grain of salt. This is kind of some experimentation we did, but if it helps him with a path forward, then great. And then we should discuss more next week, and then probably have a follow-up item. I strongly agree that we should include some value set support in our view spec. And so I don't think there's any, seems like we all are on the same page for that part. And we'll just evaluate the options to figure it out how to do it.
Sorry, a quick question. So what is the motivation for creating a view out of a value set? I mean, beyond member of, are there specific use cases that we think like having a view definition helps on a value set?
I heard it as just kind of a fun thing that was possible with this infrastructure and kind of a way for us to test it internally.
Well, it allows us to kind of have a pattern for implementing member of, because now you'll have a schema that you can say, this is the expectation. You can take a FHIR value set, you have a view definition that represents the expansion like this, and therefore member of becomes the pattern to implement that is straightforward.
Right, but isn't that like an implementation detail? What I mean is that what needs to be in the spec is the member of, and then
I think you're exactly right. Fundamentally, it is an implementation detail, but if it's one that several implementers could benefit from a little bit of consistency on, that becomes just one option for how they can make their member of function work, or a piece of the pipeline for making it work. I don't think we would ever require people to use that because, as you say, it's kind of hidden below the abstraction barrier.
Using the RFC terminology, I feel like if we had a view definition of expanded value sets, it would be like, users may use this view definition of expanded value sets if it's convenient for that, but other implementations may do something totally different. Nonetheless, I do think it would be fun sort of dog fooding exercise to create it and actually use it for. I mean, I think as we evolve like the stuff we see here to align with the spec, I mean, we would almost certainly want to use such an implementation. So that sounds great.
And sorry, since I interrupted the conversation, maybe I ask a question as well. So have we thought about tooling around writing these kind of view definitions, or this has not been a topic so far? What I mean is that, you know, for example, when I start writing like a FHIR path, it can just like suggest to me that, you know, okay, this works, this doesn't work. This FHIR path is valid before like testing it.
I think this group is kind of focused on nailing like what the core spec looks like and the core structure and the semantics and the behavior and stress testing that against our use cases. And because there's obviously quite a lot of work there, and I've frankly learned a whole lot from a lot of people in this room along the way. So I don't think that we've gotten into the tooling space, and I'm not sure if it's even the role of this group to get too much in the tooling space. I mean, if we can get the spec really strong, then I would imagine, I think it'd be great to you know, encourage, you know, implementers to kind of create their own tooling and explore in that space on the best way to build this. But I'm just thinking out loud at this point. Dan, we definitely want to get to your topic. Maybe it would make sense to jump to your topic now. And
yes, this is something that that came up kind of last week, but I thought about it a little bit more and couldn't really come up with use cases not to structure things this way. So stop speaking enigmatically. So Nikolai had suggested putting kind of a where key. Actually, let me share this. Fortunately, a little bit small, but this is an example that Josh and Nikolai have been working on around showing how union could work. But the reason I'm pulling it up is it has an example of a kind of putting a where key in each section. And so basically anytime you have a from and a select, you could also have a where key, which is nice because it kind of aligns with SQL a little bit. Is a very clear way of saying like this object is now being filtered by this condition. The thing I wanted to address is we also have another where. We also have the where FHIR path expression, which you could imagine could be here. Instead of having a where clause in this union, you could have from observation dot where and then have code.coding.exist and have the same where clause in the from section. You could also have the same where clause in the select section at the column level. And so I think this is kind of a pretty confusing pattern. And I guess thinking about it more, I couldn't think of real use cases where you wouldn't be able to accomplish kind of all of your filtering with just a where key. And so certainly open to use cases on this thing. What I was thinking is basically like where in select is a little weird to begin with. So we have these select paths, which kind of correspond to like columns in a SQL statement. And so it's a little ambiguous what a where even means there. So if that column, if doesn't meet the where criteria, then what? Does your whole query like not return rows, or do you get a false, or do you know, at which point it's kind of like a case statement in SQL. So you have this kind of weird semantics. And we've gone through and defined these at the kind of higher level object where we do for each or for each null. And so since you can have a where clause on those, it seems kind of redundant to have where clauses in other places as well. Similarly, like in from, that's actually at the same level as the where we're proposing. And so having a where in your FHIR path expression there, that's the same like action as putting that statement in a where key is confusing. I probably should have prepared some examples. I could certainly do that, but I guess I'm wondering if we actually need the where FHIR path expression anywhere, or if we can kind of just put a FHIR path expression in a where key in our view definition. So I know that wasn't the clearest presentation. I apologize for that. Does that make sense to people, or is anybody confused about what I'm even talking about here?
So for the where I mean, so are you proposing that we keep the where key at the top level of the view definition, but not in the nested levels, or eliminating?
I'm actually proposing the opposite, that we keep the where key everywhere, but we don't have a where FHIR path expression function, so that it's kind of the equivalent, right? Like you could write, so this where key is a FHIR path expression, right? But it's not a where FHIR path function. You could write this as a where FHIR path function. If you were rewriting it, you could say observation.where and then have this expression here. But I guess I'm suggesting that because it's kind of clean this way, right? So you have from, which doesn't have a filter on it. You have select, which doesn't have a filter on it. And then you have a filter on the kind of object that you're working with, which is the where expression there. And so if I wanted to do different filters for different sets of fields, I would just put them in different from each, for each blocks.
Mm-hmm.
So that mean that based on the keyword from select where, there'd be constraints on what FHIR path would be available?
Yeah, so I guess we're proposing kind of a FHIR path subset regardless, and I'm just suggesting that if we have a where kind of a where property in our objects, we don't need a where function in our FHIR path expression. So like everything else here, the where property would take a FHIR path expression, and that expression would just be a filter. Whereas kind of in some of the earlier proposals, let's see. So here's a good example from Josh. Here there's a where in the from key. So it's observation.where code.coding.exists. I think Nikolai just moved it. And so you could have the same action by adding a where key at that level.
But Dan, this is a good example because you have selected a where clause on the screen right now, but inside of that where clause is another where clause. I mean, actually it's written as .exists, but
yeah,
that's just shorthand for .where such and such .exists.
Yeah.
So I don't think we can take where out of our FHIR path subset because
that's fair. Yeah.
We're using it. We could have, I for sure see how we could have a preferred style and say, this is the cleanest way to write your views for readability and consistency. But I don't love the idea of trying to prohibit certain keywords in certain spots when they're allowed in others within FHIR path expressions.
Yeah. I get that. So that's a really good point. I guess my argument would be to allow that in a where expression. So a where expression is just kind of an implicit where at the start that's not written out. And so you could have where expressions there. I guess where it gets really dicey to me is at the select level, at the column level. So I guess in terms of from, it just seems confusing to me there because you're going to have a from with a where clause and you could have a where key with a where clause there. And so maybe I assume they're then anded together, but like sometimes it'll be here and sometimes it'll be there. That seems like very confusing to me semantically. I guess I would be okay with a constraint that said like, you can't put where clauses in a from or in a select key, but you can have them in a where key.
What's the semantic difference between the way Josh wrote the from dot where and the one below? Is it just a style difference or is there any other?
Yeah, I think it's just a style difference, which is like the thing, at least again, straw man argument, but like at least like I think it would be good to avoid. Like I think this is going to be confusing for users, but also like you have to now kind of look in two places to figure out like what data is actually being returned. And then the really confusing part to me is you could also have a where in your select, and I don't even know what that does. Like what does that mean for the column? Does that apply to your entire query result, or is that like a case if null sort of thing on the column. Like that's just, I know we could define semantics, but there's no intuitive semantics to me for that.
I mean, given like these things, FHIR path expression, obviously we have semantics, like if the FHIR path expression returns, null or returns the empty set, then, I think we have semantics for that. And I would expect those to be the same. If there was a where in there, then, and it returns null, it would follow those semantics. I get what you're saying with regards to having like this, having a where expression in, like a from or a select, and having a where expression on top of that. Yeah, we can define clear. I can see how that would appear confusing and to a lot of users. So yeah, that I think that's a fair point. Yeah, at the same time, it's like, yeah, I'm not sure. But I also agree with Josh's point of not wanting to constrain it. If we support the where expression anywhere in FHIR path, we should probably support it everywhere we have a FHIR path expression. And so, yeah, I'm not sure.
I don't know, like, why is that the case though? Like, I guess, because we're supporting a subset, we could say this subset applies here and this subset applies there.
I agree, we could say that. No, but it's just like thinking about use cases here. I think examples will help. I don't know if we've ever written up examples that use where expressions in the select, but I suspect we have. And I can think of a bunch of places where that would be sort of a convenient way to write it. Like maybe I want a for each over all a patient's contacts, but then within a contact, I just want to select like the first phone number that is a home phone number. And yeah, I could have an additional for loop to try to pull out the phone numbers. But if that's literally the only place where I'm touching one and I'm okay with it being empty or something like this, attaching that filter right at the point that I'm extracting the phone number for that row seems pretty convenient and also like a little less verbose than going through an extra nested select, extra nested for each.
Yeah, except the distinction I guess I would make is that like we have for each or null. And so you'd have to also redefine, if you don't nest that in kind of a loop, then you have to redefine that semantics again at the kind of column level. Otherwise,
but I think it's the semantics, like Brian said, are already defined. I mean, they're just FHIR path semantics. If your expression returns empty, I think the way that we say it is you don't get a row out. And if your expression has a value, that's the value in that column.
Okay. But it's weird to me because you're impacting other columns at the same level potentially with an expression in one column. So if your column that's filtering on home returns null, then your column that's filtering on work would also return null. And I guess I find that confusing. I guess if each of those were wrapped in a for each, then you could say for home, we're doing a for each on addresses that have home, and then we're returning the street and city, and we're doing a for each on addresses that have work, and we're for each or null on both of those, and we're doing one on work that's going to return the address if there's work. I think to me, and this just might be my particular view of this, but like I think it becomes then confusing to have one column that's impacting another column without that clear expression of like, I want rows, I don't want rows.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. I really think we're going to benefit from examples here, because even in the case with the 2 for eaches that you just described, I think there might still be a lot of weirdness with for each or null, where then I go to select a column where I might be pulling something out of the null field. Like it's hard for me to imagine all of this, but I think as we start trying to tackle some real world data query use cases, we're going to be able to rely on our intuitions a little bit more with those examples.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it's probably worth kind of defining a few examples of the different ways of doing this. Yeah, I guess my inclination, which could be wrong, is that it's going to be very confusing to have wheres in 3 places in a single kind of query expression. So being able to have it in the select, in the from, and in the where clause seems like an anti-pattern to me. But I guess, yeah, it may be too early to start kind of defining that.
Another thought experiment could be, could you collapse from and where into one thing? So
I mean,
there's
you
just,
definitely can.
That's where we are
Sorry.
now.
and
yeah.
just like, what would that be terrible?
I think that's currently what we have specified. Nikolai was proposing that we add a where to just break up the parts and maybe make it a little bit easier to read at a glance.
So is it for readability or where process? It sounds like it's just for readability, maybe.
I heard the request as a request to improve readability, but I don't want to speak for Nikolai.
Yeah, and we can definitely ask him next week, but that was my understanding as well, is that it's just for clarity and aligns a little more with the SQL. But I guess from a clarity perspective, which I actually agree with, I kind of think it's nice to have a from, a select, and a where that roughly correspond to what people might expect from SQL. I think having the where then in two places is problematic, and I still am not sold really on where in a select column. We could look at some examples for sure, but to me, that since we've defined semantics around for each as our way of like managing expansions, I think kind of having a separate approach for that is somewhat confusing.
Are we ever going to join, like do it like where you join, like, do we have an example of joining like observation and patient or observation and encounter or something, or condition and patient? And then would the where clause need to be there to support what you're filtering?
So I think we've put that out of scope for now, but that
Okay.
doesn't mean that we shouldn't. I think your point is valid. Like, I guess we don't want to, I wouldn't want to make decisions that would make that impossible in the future.
Right.
But I think we're not, I think we agreed kind of initially not to design towards that.
The examples I can think of where I would want to stick a where in a select clause would generally be about picking, the best one of something. I've got a list of them, but I'm just trying to pull out a certain one. And if I wanted to express that with for each, I think I'd be doing something like what I put in chat here, which is like for each, and then doing some where filtering and then calling first, or something to basically say I only want one. And I think the semantics of that are clear enough, but it is like a slightly odd thing to have to do to build a for loop that is, sort of at most going to loop over one item, whereas including that sort of logic in a select just to me feels pretty natural.
I was thinking along the same lines, or like the example I pinged was like, selecting systolic or diastolic blood pressures. And so this expression, while complicated, at least it's all in one place, and I can say this is my my systolic blood pressure, and it's all there.
Yeah,
again,
I guess, but
it doesn't feel like a select and enroll. It feels like because I think part of it's like the semantics around like slicing and that sort of thing are more like a specific field access. It's still a where expression from a FHIR path expression, but it's less SQL-y.
I guess like though, Ryan, like in that example, I don't know that I would put that in the select, right? Like likely I want to select like a couple fields out of that component. And so I think kind of moving that up one level into your loop would make sense to me. I feel like if you have more than one field that you want to select from whatever you're filtering, I wouldn't necessarily want it in the select either. I get that you can do dot first and therefore they should be equivalent. Seems
I agree.
to me. Yeah,
I'm not suggesting we put this in the select. I'm actually referencing the example we have in the draft now where it's in the from. And so to me, that having this like in the from is nice, because I could say from, and this gets me my systolic blood pressure, and it's a single field, and so from makes sense because it's not a loop where we're expecting one, but it just gets that, and then the select that lives under that from can get all the unit value and so on.
But I guess then I would say like from component where code.coding whatever, and then select like. And they're like it's the same, it's almost the same, but it's like a little cleaner because we have like the from, which is maybe more like the SQL table, and then the where, which is more like the SQL where, and then the select, which is kind of the field. So like I guess I would argue that unless we're really against having a where, or sorry, not really against, but unless we decide not to have a where key, or where property, like I would argue that it's cleaner than to not have the where.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, and yeah, maybe like we're going through some examples and kind of going through and evaluating it. It seems like this is another one of those sort of judgment calls where I could definitely see advantages to a distinct where, but I think your points stand of having things in multiple places. I mean, everything has upsides and downsides. And so
Yeah.
walking through a little more concretely, and then we can kind of make a decision from there.
I think certainly some examples, but I think we should keep in mind like whether we want to break out where and whether we want to allow where in selects as two kind of topics to kind of consider over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, sounds good.
Just on that topic, I just pasted in, which you probably all know, there's like that subset of FHIR path that restricts it, like FHIR path simple. So you could imagine that sort of idea if you wanted to say, you know, from can only have, this is only supported. So there's like this is used in like dynamic value and activity definitions and plan definitions, or at least two places it's used. There's kind of a precedent for that sort of thing, I guess, already.
Yeah, we have join right in select right now, which seems useful and isn't in this list, unfortunately, but we could have our own list, I guess, of subsets.
Yeah, I think it's not too big a deal for us to define our subset.
I could see having one subset for from and select and one subset for where, if we decide to go that route.
Seems like we have some good follow-up items for next week.
So next week, we're gonna maybe have some more discussion on value sets and potentially where stuff, or maybe we let that kind of go a little bit longer as we kind of think through more examples.
Sounds good. Yeah. So I'll give myself to put together a pull request for like the floor, instant, and ceiling instant type semantics as well, so we can discuss that. I mean, and then as well. Yeah, happy to discuss the floor, the values. Yeah, we can go further in the value set discussion. I don't know if there's anyone that's interested in preparing some concrete suggestions or proposal for value set inclusion, or I guess there's like I'd love to see that more the OMOP stuff as one topic, but yeah, maybe I'll ask if there's someone that might be interested in a value set behavior or member of proposal. I can expand on that as well. I'm not sure if I'll be able to do that and the floor and ceiling release stuff, but yeah, we can just chat about it next week.
Yeah, it might make sense to have kind of another round of kind of thinking and chatting, and then try to write up wherever we land.
Yeah, it'd be good to look at the OMOP stuff and consider that as we go forward too. Nice. And then I guess like the next item for next week will be like the where. Continue the discussion on the where semantics. I kind of like the fact that we're getting into these sorts of discussions now, as opposed to like rehashing our entire structure every couple of weeks like we were a while ago. So I think we're like asymptotically converging on a pretty solid spec here. But yeah, the last 5% is always going to be, there's going to be lots of stuff to work out there for sure. All right, I guess we'll land there. Yeah, thanks everybody. Have a great weekend.